All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're tackling a historical mystery that has fascinated people for centuries. We are going to look closely at the terrifying and frankly fascinating truth behind the collapse of history's absolute greatest superpower, the Roman Empire. The Eternal City. You know, the Romans actually coined this phrase themselves. They honestly believed their sprawling empire, with its massive stone roads stretching farther than anyone could imagine, aqueducts moving millions of gallons of fresh water every single day, and legions guarding borders thousands of miles away, they thought it would never, ever disappear. But right off the bat, we need to separate fact from fiction. The myth is that Rome was destroyed overnight in some glorious last battle or a fiery apocalypse. The reality, though, it's actually a lot more terrifying. It was a slow, almost unnoticed decay from within, a collapse brought on by compounding internal crises that happened almost without the Romans even realizing it, until it was way too late. Section 1. The Rot at the Top. A true crisis of leadership. So let's kick off our historical autopsy with a pretty staggering number, 20. Between the years 235 and 284 CE, the empire experienced what historians now call the crisis of the 3rd century. In just a 50-year span, Rome went through more than 20 different emperors. That is an absolutely astonishing rate of turnover for an empire of that size. And spoiler alert, most of those 20 emperors did not die peacefully in their sleep. We're talking constant assassinations, usually at the hands of their very own soldiers. This led to relentless civil wars erupting all across the empire. Every single time they fought each other for the throne, the treasury was drained and the borders were completely ignored. I mean, imagine trying to run a vast government when your own army might assassinate you tomorrow. This political chaos totally distracted the Romans, while their enemies just sat back and watched the show. Which brings us to Section 2, the bleeding treasury, a complete economic death spiral. All that internal political instability we just talked about directly triggered a catastrophic economic meltdown. For centuries, continuous military conquest was basically Rome's cash cow. It brought enormous wealth into the empire: gold, silver, land, enslaved peoples. But eventually, the expansion halted. The borders reached their absolute limits. Fewer victories meant less captured wealth to fund what was an incredibly expensive empire. The costs of maintaining all those roads, forts, cities, and a massive population just kept growing, but the incoming treasure had totally dried up. So what do you do to pay the bills when your massive empire is practically broke? Well, emperors raised taxes, and when that wasn't enough, they actually started reducing the real silver content in Roman coins to stretch the budget. And yep, you guessed it, that caused severe inflation. Prices spiraled completely out of control, wiping out the life savings of ordinary citizens and making basic trade incredibly difficult. And right when the economy is incredibly vulnerable, nature steps in and deals a devastating blow. Massive epidemic strike, wiping out huge portions of the population. You know what that means? Fewer available workers. This naturally resulted in drastically lower agricultural production across the farmlands. Less food production meant drastically less tax revenue for a government that desperately needed every single coin. Every crisis was literally feeding the next one, leaving the empire entirely broke. Moving on to Section 3, the broken shield. Outsourcing the empire's defense. Think about it. A broke, diseased empire just can't afford to maintain hundreds of thousands of legendary legionaries across vast borders anymore. So instead of a traditional army of disciplined citizens who were fiercely dedicated to the state, Rome had to start outsourcing its defense. Recruitment got harder, citizens didn't want to serve, so they relied heavily on foreign recruits and allied tribes. Now, while many of them fought bravely, these mercenaries were usually paid for their loyalty to the coin, not to Rome itself. Section 4. The wolves let in. The barbarians at the gates. So the internal foundation is completely hollowed out by political chaos, a broken economy, and an outsourced military, right? Now, external pressures can literally just kick in a rotting door. The world outside Rome's borders was shifting violently. A terrifying new force emerged from the Eurasian steppes, the Hunts. Their brutal advance pushed numerous Germanic tribes right into Roman territory. Now, here's the wild part. A lot of these groups weren't even initially invaders. They were literally refugees seeking safety. But thanks to severe corruption, mistreatment, and broken promises by Roman officials, these desperate migrants turned into open enemies. Rome's own disastrous decisions created their worst nightmares. The fallout from those failures was horrific. It's just a rapid, humiliating sequence of physical destruction. In 378 CE, the Goths crushed the Roman army at Adrianople, killing the emperor himself and totally shattering that myth of Roman invincibility. Then, in 410 CE, the unthinkable happens. Visigoths actually sack the city of Rome itself. Fast forward to 455 CE, the Vandals capture and loot Rome once again. And finally, in 476 CE, a Germanic commander named Odoacer simply removes the final young emperor from power. But here is a really crucial detail about the year 476 CE. There was no giant cinematic final stand. There was no burning apocalypse. The final Western emperor just quietly lost power, and the imperial regalia were casually packed up and sent over to Constantinople. Power just quietly shifted. While the western half of the empire fell, the Eastern Roman Empire actually continued to survive and function for nearly another 1,000 years.
Section 5. The Autopsy. A compounding crisis.
Looking back at everything we've just covered, it is crystal clear that no single invasion, no single bad emperor, or one unlucky economic dip brought down this ancient superpower. It was a deadly chain reaction. Political instability severely weakened their leadership, which allowed an economic decline to totally hollow out society from the inside. With absolutely no money, outsourcing the military destroyed their national security. And finally, external migrations perfectly exploited those exact vulnerabilities. It was the slow accumulation of countless ignored failures. Each crisis basically fed right into the next one, compounding until recovery was just mathematically and physically impossible.
Section 6. An empire's lasting legacy. The ghost of Rome. Now, this explainer wouldn't be complete without looking at the aftermath, because even though the political structure collapsed completely under its own crushing weight, the ghost of Rome never really left us. Their fingerprints are quite literally everywhere today. Our modern legal systems are heavily influenced by Roman law. Government architecture all over the world is inspired by their massive public buildings. Even the languages millions of us speak every day, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, they all evolved directly from Roman origins. And their engineering, from aqueducts to their concrete formulas, still amazes modern scientists. We are, for sure, still living in a world fundamentally shaped by Roman ingenuity. So what is the ultimate takeaway for us from this explainer? It's that empires almost never collapse from one big, catastrophic moment. They fall because small problems are ignored until they become totally impossible to solve. The Roman Empire didn't die in a single day. It slowly, gradually forgot how to remain the empire it once was, just ignoring the rot until the foundation gave way entirely. As we look around at the complexities, the economic challenges, and the political cracks within our own modern societies today, we really have to look back at history and ask ourselves, if the eternal city could fall, could any civilization truly last forever? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the past.